Imagine a soldier disappearing into the Philippine jungle during World War II. The world changes, countries rebuild, and technology evolves. Yet 29 years later, this man walks out of the trees carrying a rifle and hand grenades, fully convinced the war is still happening. Here's the part that sounds impossible. He wasn't trapped, and he wasn't isolated from information. People tried to tell him, again and again and again. They dropped newspapers from airplanes. They sent letters from his family and photographs of his Japan. Even official messages from his own government fell from the sky, and every time he refused to believe them. His name was Hiroo Onoda, and for nearly 3 decades he fought a war that didn't exist. But to understand how this happened, we have to go back to the moment the mission began. By December 1944, Japan was losing. American forces were advancing across the Pacific, and resources were collapsing. Inside the military, surrender was framed as the ultimate shame. Soldiers were raised to believe that death was honorable, but being captured was not. Into this world stepped 22-year-old Hiroo Onoda. He was a specialist trained in an elite intelligence school, a place where soldiers learned sabotage, survival, and psychological warfare. Unlike ordinary infantry, Onoda was trained to disappear and never stop the mission. He was deployed to Lubang Island with simple instructions: sabotage the airstrip, destroy the harbor, and disrupt supply lines. Whatever happened, do not surrender. His commanding officer made a promise that shaped his life. No matter what happens, we'll come back for you. Onoda was young, disciplined, and fiercely loyal. He boarded a ship believing he was stepping into a temporary assignment, with no idea he was walking into a different lifetime. When American forces landed in the Philippines, Japanese defenses vanished quickly. Onoda and 3 other soldiers refused to give up, instead vanishing into the mountains to continue their mission from the shadows. Then, in August 1945, the world changed. Japan surrendered, and World War II ended. Millions celebrated, but deep inside the jungle of Lubang, 4 soldiers never got the message. A few months later, leaflets began falling from the sky. They were simple and direct, telling the men the war was over and it was time to come home. But when Onoda picked one up, he didn't see a message of peace. He saw enemy propaganda. Because he was trained in psychological warfare, he was taught that enemies lie to lure you out. To him, these papers were just a clever military trick. It is a bitter irony. His elite training made him perfectly equipped to outsmart his enemies, but it also made him perfectly equipped to outsmart the truth. Years passed in a cycle of rain, disease, and isolation. The men survived by stealing rice and cattle, waking up every morning believing enemy soldiers could attack at any moment. There were no vacations and no peace, just the mission. The world kept trying to reach them. More newspapers fell. Official government documents and family photographs were scattered across the jungle. Loudspeakers even blasted the voices of their own parents through the trees, begging them to come out. Every time a piece of evidence arrived, Onoda's mind found a reason to reject it. If the letters looked authentic, he believed the Americans had kidnapped his family to forge them. In his mind, the better the evidence looked, the more dangerous the trick was. In 1950, one of the soldiers, Yuichi Akatsu, finally broke. He disappeared and eventually surrendered, telling the world the shocking truth: there were still men fighting World War II in the jungle. But for Onoda, admitting the war was over meant admitting his immense sacrifice had been for nothing. Protecting the mission had become his entire identity. Without the war, who even was he? The mission took a tragic turn during a shootout with local police, where Corporal Shimada was killed. Most people would have surrendered then, but Onoda used the death as a reason to double down on his orders. There was also an uncomfortable reality for the local villagers. While Onoda believed he was a hero protecting Japan, to the farmers trying to feed their families, these men were terrifying insurgents who stole their food and shot at their neighbors. After 27 years, the last of his companions was killed. Onoda was left alone in the jungle silence with a war that only he remembered. While he was cleaning a 1944 rifle every day, the Japan he knew had vanished. Cities glowed with neon, bullet trains crossed the country, and the Tokyo Olympics had already happened. He was enduring unimaginable hardship to protect a version of his country that had stopped existing decades ago. In 1974, a young Japanese traveler named Norio Suzuki set out on a ridiculous quest. He told his friends he wanted to find 3 things: a panda, the abominable snowman, and Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. Suzuki actually found him. He sat with Onoda in the jungle, talking with him and gently explaining the truth, that the war ended in 1945 and the world had moved on. Onoda listened politely, but his response was unshakable. He said he would only surrender if his commanding officer ordered him to do so. Even when faced with a friendly, undeniable reality, his identity remained tethered to a chain of command that had been broken for nearly 30 years. Suzuki returned to Japan and found Onoda's former commander, Major Taniguchi. The man was no longer a military leader. He was an old man working in a bookstore, but he agreed to return to the jungle one last time. On March 9, 1974, Taniguchi stood before Onoda and officially relieved him of duty. In a single moment, the mission was over, and the illusion of 3 decades finally crashed into reality. He walked out of the jungle carrying a rifle in working condition, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and the sword his mother had given him as a young man. He returned to Japan as a hero, but the country felt alien. The values he had lived by no longer existed in this fast-paced modern world. He had sacrificed his youth for a dream that the rest of the world had forgotten. Onoda's story is a haunting reminder of the power of belief. It makes us ask, what battles are we still fighting in our own lives that already ended? An old failure, a version of ourselves, or a promise that stopped making sense years ago? Because sometimes the hardest part of a fight isn't surviving the battle. It's realizing it ended